Information on 4 projects, and there's an example. That's an assessment. That's one successful application. It is there. There's no doubt about that. It's a very straightforward process. It's not designed for academic applicants. It's designed for those who have practical experience. The Act says practical training experience. It's in the Act. I don't know how many times I can say that, but it is there. Now, I'd hesitate to contradict Deputy Lynch, but the account I've given is the actual account, because the 7-year examination is still in the Act. That's the ARE examination. Now, I can't speak about the cost of that because that has nothing to do with the RIAI. It is in the Act. It is. I mean, I don't want to get across.
Sorry, but the cost is in the room, Chairperson, if you don't mind.
Sorry, Deputy.
You can, Chairperson. You get plenty of time, but we'll get time to discuss.
We'll get back if you want.
Okay, we'll get back to that. That's the key issue. It is in the Act. There is a fair and open process. Now, Deputy Hogan raised the question of the structure. This is what the Commission itself has called co-regulation. It's not self-regulation. There was institutional agreement between the Commission, the Council of Ministers and the Parliament on trying to, I suppose, speed up processes, the SLIM process and so on. And this was defined as a process whereby a legislative enactment is delegated to a non-governmental organisation with safeguards in the legislation afterwards. In terms of the Technical Assessment Board, the Minister appoints the majority non-architects to that board. The chairperson is a barrister. There's an internal appeals board, again with a non-architect majority. There's appeals to the court. This is totally independent. It is not and cannot be controlled by the RIAI or by architects. And the Technical Assessment Board, the chairperson of the board, is very careful to ensure it's totally independent. As I say, the process is there. And maybe just to deal with Deputy O'Donoghue's point, his colleague Mary Rourke dealt with it very well in the Shannon when she said, when I hear the title Royal, my Republican sympathies kind of are grated on. And she said, what I realise now is maybe if they were around for a long time, they survived because they haven't made too many mistakes along the way. So,
unlike the Royals.
Exactly, yes, exactly. I like the Royals. And I think she put it rather well. I mean, I suppose take it to something at random. Michael Scott is always quoted. Michael Scott took the RIAI final examinations in 1936. It's on the archives. That was the way it was done in the past. What I said in my presentation is, in a sense, there's a movement away in educational circles from purely have you got a qualification to what have you actually done? What's the outcome? Deputy Lynch talked about that. He's been through the process himself. And this is what is proposed here. There has to be some form of assessment. I don't think anybody around this table would say, well, you just sign a piece of paper and say, I've been working as an architect for the last 10 years. There's a very simple, straightforward system in the Act that's fair to everybody. And it has to be fair because it's going to be subject to legal scrutiny, appeal to the courts. It's kind of hard to say more on that particular one. As to people losing their livelihood, as I said, this is an opportunity. Because somebody, for example, if you don't have a recognised qualification, you're not an RIAI member, you will not get the majority of state projects. This opens up the market. It doesn't close it down. Now, I've said not everyone will get through this process, despite it being fair and robust. But you can still work in the field of architecture. There's no change there. But the consumer is entitled to know that a person who uses the title architect has got and has reached certain minimum standards. Because if there's no benchmark, you can't have a code of conduct. Because any lawyer would be able to say, look, Mr. So-and-so, you couldn't expect him to know that because he wasn't educated to that standard. There has to be, and we're talking about a minimum standard. I've no doubt that many of the people in the Architects Alliance, and there are more out there as well, we have a list of 300 people who are interested in taking this system. Many of them are very competent people. They will have no difficulty in getting through this system. And as I said again, 10 years in the field of architecture, that's all before May 2008. 4 projects, a CV and verifications. It is not difficult. I'd ask all the deputies to come and look at a successful application here. In relation to having an Ireland-only system, it's a possibility. It's not in the Act. And let me emphasise, the RIAI did not draft this Act. The government drafted the Act. They were very conscious of the European dimension. And this is not theoretical, because 100 kilometres up the road you have Northern Ireland. Can you imagine a situation where you ask an architect to do a job in Dundalk, and then you want to do one in Uri and discover he or she can't represent you there? It's not theoretical. As a matter of interest, 3 of the people who took our pilot scheme who have already registered in the UK. I mean, we shouldn't be depriving people of opportunities. That's why I'm saying it's very important that a minimum standard complies with the directive. It's not gold-plated. It's very basic. It's in your information there, Article 3, Article 46, the Qualifications Directive. I suppose that's really. I don't believe that people are going to lose their livelihood. I would believe that and you've quoted some cases, that anybody who's experienced and they're competent will get through the system. Not everybody will. It's also confidential. There's not going to be a list of saying Mr. X didn't get through. They can continue working, but they can't use the title architect. I come back to my point about the survey. People believe the title architect means qualifications. People are being misled inadvertently. The consumer needs some certainty. That's all this Act does. And I don't think the Alliance also are suggesting that there should be no evaluation. But there has to be such an evaluation.
Mr. Scanlon, you didn't ask any question.
Just a question, follow on from Mr. Gravy's submission. You state that somebody would have to provide 4 projects, successful planning applications. Is there any monetary value on those projects, or are we talking about 4 bungalows? Are we talking about 4?
No limit. I think no limit whatsoever. The question is often asked. A small project can often show more skills than a major project. It's just 4 projects of any kind. What it's meant to do is to show and demonstrate that you've carried out all the range of tasks of an architect, from design, planning permission, regulations, completed project. You don't have to be somebody who's created huge buildings. They don't have to be particularly remarkable buildings. You've got to show you've carried out the task. Can I just talk briefly about costs? Because I have to say, on the ARE one, that has nothing to do with us. A person with a qualification coming to the RIAI will pay €145 for their transcript evaluation. If they have to be interviewed, which is very, very rare, there's a further 300. But after the 145, they will pay €490 per year to stay on the register. I don't know where the figures of 11,500 and 6,500. If you're going to apply through technical assessment, the current figures are 6,500. The breakdown is in the papers. That's the actual cost. And as an organisation, the RIAI can't take on a task that is not self-funded. There's an opening for the state there, something the committee could consider, to support people who need to go through this process. But that is the cost. And the Minister is due to make a decision on this. I've talked about review, and I've talked about evidence-based discussions with the Department. If it's wrong, it's wrong. We will change and refund.
Mr. O'Neill, briefly. 1 second now. Mr. O'Neill, briefly, you want to come in?
Please, if you wouldn't
very
mind.
Brief now, please, because
very briefly.
I have to leave here at 5 anyway, where the rest of you have to leave it. Go ahead.
During the comments made by Mr. Gravy, we had 2 things referred to which, to my mind, sound the same but actually aren't. Mr. Gravy referred to the EU minimum. Now, in my submission, I've made it quite clear that the EU minimum was set at the graduate level, not at the level of a member of the Institute. Shortly after that, in his submission, Mr. Gravy referred to a minimum standard of assessment. Now, it's my clear understanding that the minimum standard of assessment equates to the member of the Institute standard. That is not an equation to a standard of a graduate. And the point is, in law at the moment, a graduate like me can't call myself an architect, even though in the EU directives I'm entitled to call myself an architect. This is a basic issue, because if you then apply the standard of member to the kind of examinations maybe members of the Alliance might have to go up, you're well up.
Okay. Final speaker from the deputation, Ms. Flanagan.
She's more expert in this area of the directive, and she can give an answer to that, if you don't mind.
Just to clarify that via the Department of Education and Science, the European Commission have notified us that the higher level, the professional level qualification must be listed and will be listed for all states. So the graduate level very soon will no longer apply. The impression from the Commission is that that was erroneous, and the higher level should be applied in all states and will be before the end of this year.
Deputy Donoghue.
Very briefly, Chairman.
I'm not going to stop the debate again now, but
No, I understand that. Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gravy makes a very eloquent and erudite contribution, but unfortunately, irrespective of what he says, the bottom line remains that people who are currently practicing as architects will no longer be in a position to practice as architects as a result of this legislation if implemented.
Deputy Hogan.
I just want to get some more clarification on the costings. The technical assessment of architects, which is that a requirement of admission to the RIAI?
No, that is specifically for those who go through the 10-year assessment. And if you have qualifications, there's a transcript evaluation fee of $145 and then an annual charge of $490. The 6.5 only applies to the assessment of those who don't have formal qualifications. And it's important to say it's not an examination where everybody goes through a set process, a set questions. It's a case-by-case individual assessment. It's a difficult process. It has to be done as well as possible. We've invested a lot of money in training assessors, in standardising procedures, so it will withstand, in fact, any legal challenge. But that's only for technical assessment. That's all.
Okay, what conclusion, Deputy Lynch? Very briefly now, because we have to come to a conclusion on this and make some recommendation if we have to.
My own contribution, I asked a series of questions which haven't been answered, and I'll distill them down to one. What is the cost of putting a portfolio together? How many people went through the portfolio process last year? And how many people were staffed in terms of actually overseeing those portfolios?
3 questions there.
That's earlier, Chairperson, if you don't mind.
Well, yeah. I'm just saying that the costings that are in the documentation in front of you
I'm asking you, Mr. Garvey, if you don't mind.
They're based.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm not.
Answer now.
The gentleman has the information to hand. He knows it. I just asked him, can he give it to me? I'm not saying that
we have given the Minister a complete breakdown, hour by hour. Unfortunately, as is with the Minister, I can't give that complete breakdown to you. Every hour, every quarter of an hour has been accounted for. It's based on the pilot scheme we ran, and that's with the Minister for his approval, or not, as the case may be. In the papers, there's a breakdown of the costs. You can see them there.
And can you talk me through that?
I can talk you through that, certainly, yeah.
Supply the Deputy with that information.
This is a critical matter now, Chairperson. If you're in a rush, we can get another Deputy Chair if we need to, but this matter needs to be attended to.
All right.
Okay.
Now, if you go to, I think it will be page
20.
Page 20 of the main submission. Now, you can see the figures there. For example, the maintenance of the Technical Assessment Board. A full year's administration of the Technical Assessment Board, paying expenses, paying the chairpersons, costs about $54,000. I'll take an example. Assessor hours. There's 3 assessors. They're allocated 9 hours for completing the full task. No more than 9 hours. They get €75 an hour. That comes about $1,900. There's a support and administration. There is provision for stationery. We have to actually record every session. There's a huge amount of administration goes with that. Every single part of that has been costed. That information has been given to the Minister. I don't have with me, Deputy, the full breakdown. I would like to have it. It's with the Minister. But I can assure you, and as soon as the Minister is happy, we can release these figures to the committee, and you can see where every single part of that comes from. Every single part of that can be justified. But what I'm saying is that's based on our pilot scheme. It's not theory. We took a record of all the times involved, every single phase. That's why it's in phases there. You may notice also additional costs that we've incurred since then in terms of training and so on. That information can be given. And if somebody shows, it's a proper and shows on an evidence basis they're wrong, we'll correct that and refund any money to the candidates.
Just in a general ballpark figure, can you tell me how much a portfolio would cost somebody to put together, and how many went through last year? How much?
No, first of all, I don't know how much it would cost an applicant to put this together.
No, how much are you charging for somebody to go through that process? I'm not asking how much it costs for somebody to present it. What is the cost of putting a portfolio through the process?
That's what I said. It's $6,500. That's on page 20.
That's the total cost of it to somebody presenting it?
Everything, assessment, the lot.
And how many went through last year?
The pilot scheme was in 2007-2008. Yeah. This was launched only in November the 16th, and at the present moment we have, I think, about 3 or 4 applications being processed, with more to come. And that's why I'm saying we can review those as it runs through. But there were none last year because the system wasn't in place.
You've been very quiet there. I'll let you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.